So, this might be a slightly shorter video than normal, but I really wanted to discuss the Spatial Temple in its own specific category. Because there's a great deal to talk about the Spatial Temple. So you'll forgive me if I fail miserably at describing it, due to everything that there is within it. First thing, well, okay. Let's just go ahead and actually do something that I meant to do right before I did this. Now, the party is traveling here along with several members of the Order, and, I'd say about another 30-ish people who are simply undergoing a pilgrimage. Now, all these people are not from Alfarin, which is where they were setting out from. Most of these had simply been stopping there because there was an Order outpost, and, it was the next stop on their journey. Lots of people tend to make pilgrimages toward the temples. There's not really anything new about that. So on their way there, it hits the point, basically just perfectly, where the sun is just beginning to rise in the east as they are approaching the temple from the east, so the sun is at their backs, but they can see it from... Well, let's just say they're not sure what they're looking at first, but they can see it from miles upon miles upon miles away, because it stretches up into the air quite a ways. But there is this black shape just kind of hovering in the air, and the closer they get, the closer they realize that it does in fact have a very specific design to it. Now I'm going to go ahead and just start, find the image here, and throw it up. There we go. Whoops, we need to shrink that down a bit. Well, while I'm shrinking this down. So, the Spatial Temple, all the temples, all the elemental temples, which I've only talked about in brief, have some specific qualities to them. Number one, it is impossible to have the mentality to enact ill will near them. In other words, someone once asked me, for example, well, how do they handle with crime? To which I responded, there is no crime around here. Well, what do you mean? How is there no crime? To which I responded, they're incapable of thinking about the act of crime. Well, what about military personnel? Nope. No act of violence either. Now this is... we'll just put this over here in the middle. Actually, I guess we'll put it like this onto the side, so you can see that. I don't know how well you can see that, but there it is. The Spatial Temple sketch. That's done by Ivan, of course, since, artist. But that black shape is what they see way, way off into the distance. And as they're on approach, it becomes clear to them just how absolutely monumentally huge this place is. I don't know if you could tell in the image, but there is a little trail leading down that little hill out of which the tower is springing, and that trail leads down into what is basically a little town. Now that town isn't a town in any real sense of the word. It is basically an outpost whose only purpose is to service people who are working at the temple, or visiting the temple, or pilgrimaging the temple, or... you get the general point, right? Now, one of the other interesting things about this, as they're on approach, is every single member of the party, as they get closer to this place, just starts to feel better. Like, I don't actually know how to describe it better than that. They just start to feel better, like things, they're more energetic, more capable of moving, they're not tired anymore. Even though they have been traveling literally all day and night, they feel like, oh yeah, we're okay. We got this. And it gets to the point where they actually can feel this thrum, this unending thrum, like vibrating the very ground beneath them. And no matter how much they, I'm sorry, no matter how, I'm saying this the wrong way. The closer they get, the more powerful that thrum gets. And the more powerful that thrum gets, the more difficult it becomes for them to be able to ignore it, I guess is the best way I could put it. But I want to describe this properly. This is not an unpleasant experience, and I had a bit of a difficulty explaining it to the players at the time, too. It's not like, the vibrations of an earthquake, or of being on a very powerful ship, or near some powerful turbines, or anything like that. It's more like being comforted, if that makes any sense at all. Like, if you could actually picture the idea of... okay, you know how a baby, when it's in a car, will tend to fall asleep because of the vibrations of the car? It's kind of like that, except, by a factor of a few thousand stronger. And so, as they're on approach to this temple, everyone's just kind of, at the same time, having more energy and being comforted by it. And as they get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer, they start to realize, again, the sheer vastness and size of this place. This thing is actually over a mile in the air, total. Over a mile. Actually, that's the point at which the staircase terminates, is a little bit over a mile. Once they get to the town at the base, most of the party members basically just run off, are like, yeah, awesome, and charge into the town just to see what they could see. And so I'm like, okay, where's everyone going? Now, I had asked well in advance, the moment I knew they wanted to go to the Spatial Temple, how many people, if they went, would want to undergo the trial. Now, I'm going to take just a moment to describe what most people know about trials in brief, okay? A trial is a specific to you circumstance that you undergo, probably magical in origination, where you examine you, yourself, your life, your choices, that kind of thing, in relation to whatever it is that particular temple represents. Or that is to say, that element represents, would actually be a better way to put that. So, they're like, okay, these handful of people would like to engage in the trial. Now, I will not actually be telling you several of their trial resultants. And the reason being, well, you know what, actually, I'll get to that in just a minute. But, moving right along. Just about everyone who wanted to engage in the trial made it a point of going up there to the tower and then to the temple itself pretty much immediately. I'll describe that last. The town at the base has a huge, like, open bazaar area, okay? It's just this massive area of stalls and selling different kinds of foods and drinks and trinkets and custom woven, artifacts, all sorts of stuff. Basically, no matter what you name. To give you just an idea, one of our party members, Sethos, the Burun, has a pipeweed thing where he likes to smoke pipeweed. It calms him down, right? Coulson decided to buy him a gift, and he got a spatial pipe for his pipeweed thing. Now, in case you don't know what I mean, if you see the actual Spatial Temple itself, the giant construct at the top there, no matter what angle you're looking at it from, it looks like you're looking at space. In other words, it looks like it has no texture, would be the way I would describe that to someone who actually knows about what textures are in video games. It would be like, literally, no matter how you're looking at it, you're looking at a window into space. So that's what this pipe looks like. And there's just other stuff like that. You can get t-shirts with little slogans emblazoned on them. You can get custom brews that are specifically brewed here, and they taste different because they've been brewed so close to an elemental ley line, blah, 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 blah. By the way, if I have not mentioned it before, all of the spatial temples rest on a nexus point, which is, in other words, when the ley line actually interacts with the physical, it comes up basically through the earth into out into the place where they are. And in case it's not obvious, the spatial ley line is actually not down there on the ground; it's up in the air where the temple actually is. That probably isn't too surprising to anybody. Now, as they're going through the town, they start to notice something very strange, and one of the party members, Zeiss, I think Rory too, were like, okay, we're gonna try stealing some stuff, or starting a bar fight. And I'm just like, no. And they were like, well, you can't railroad me like that. And I was like, well, unfortunately, in this case, I can. And I wanted to explain it to them, because it's not so much railroading as this is how the setting exists. It is theoretically possible to overcome the peaceful aura that exists near every temple. It's never been done, but it is theoretically possible. However, you guys are nowhere near the capacity to do that. So, and then I explained to him, here's how this is going to work. You have literally this aura around you, which makes it so you cannot think in that manner. And they're like, and they asked some questions about it, and I explained, and they're like, okay. So, the other thing they notice is that this place is pretty much completely run by members of the Order, the Second Wing specifically. Not that that matters too much yet. They also charge basically nothing. Like, they're like, okay, I want this and this and that and this, and they're like, you got it. And they're like, well, how much is it going to be? Well, it's so cheap that basically it's non-existent price. However, there's in every single stall, in every single shop, in every single inn that there is at that town, at the base, there is a little donation coffer thing, and those donations go towards the continued maintenance of the Spatial Temple itself. It is worth noting that those donations don't actually go to the order, if you understand the difference here. They specifically go to the, oh shoot, what's the title I gave him? Give me just one moment, please. I have a hard time remembering my own titles, that's why I write them down. Go figure, right? Ferrix. The given Ferrix, who is someone who is specifically in charge of this temple. And, here, this money will go to you, and it will go towards paying for food and supplies for the people who work here, rent, anything, medical aid, basically whatever anybody needs in order to keep this place up and running, because there are actually several thousand people maintaining this temple and keeping it functional and clean, and of course helping people out. I'll get to that in a little bit. So they spend some time in the town, and eventually everyone's like, okay, let's go ahead and advance into the temple. So they go into that massive tower structure. Now, everybody who tries to analyze it comes up blank, and several people do. Whatever the material is that tower is constructed of, they have no idea. It is some kind of metal. That's about all they've got out of it. But it's the kind of metal they've never seen before. Now, they ask a few questions, what's it like, how's it about? But basically they come up with the same general response. We don't know what it is, we don't know how it works. One of the party members, I'm going to go and diverge for just a second while we're at the tower, that would be Kazrinthka, decides to go ahead and go off exploring, and she's like, well, I want to know more about the tower, because she has this thing where she basically does not want to go all the way up a mile in the air. Fear of heights kind of thing, rather understandable if you think about it. So, she asks if she can explore the tower proper more, and I'm like, yeah, of course. She ends up finding a gentleman who works at the area as, I'd call him a guard, but it'd be more accurate to call him a ward, something like that. Someone who is here to prevent you from going someplace you shouldn't, because, as it turns out, this tower is actually a lot more dangerous than it looks. See, there's this, the base of the tower is this massive, I'd say 300-foot tall, just open space, okay? It's just this one giant room. Nothing else in it. I mean, obviously there's features and stuff, and there's all these decals and images on the walls carved into it that, of course, nobody has any idea what they are or what they mean. I described some of them in character. Nobody figured out what they meant. That didn't surprise me. And, whoops, pardon me. And so they're looking around, and there's this one little area to the side which leads off to what looks like a door. And at the far end, there's this massive circular platform-looking thing on the ground. And they're like, well, what's that? That is where everyone gathers in order to be teleported to the top. There's actually a fairly large group of people in here. Some of the party members started looking around, thinking politically, okay, I gotta find someone to do what... Actually, I don't know what they were thinking. I'm just juxtaposing. Excuse me just a second. I need to get the airflow to get something really quick. This shouldn't take me long. There we go. Sorry about that. So, when they get to the end of this room, and into the large, I shouldn't even say end, because it's a tower, the large platform on the ground, there's basically a line, and there's several order mages who are in charge of maintaining this platform, this teleport pad, and they wait for a signal, and then they let everyone, use it to go up, and then they wait, they hold everyone off from getting on it for the next thing until there's another signal, and then people come down from it. So, one group comes up, they get off, one group comes down, they get off. You get where I'm going with this, right? Now, let's go to that room to the side now that we've described the main function of this overall area. As they move off, as Kazrinthka by herself moves off to the side, a guard says, I can't let you up here. Now, she really wants to go in there, and so she actually spends several rolls in diplomacy and just really tries to convince this guy, please let me go up here, please. Finally, he's like, okay, look, if you want to, fine, but it's at your own risk, okay? If anything happens to you, there's nothing I can do for it. And she's like, okay, I'm not sure what you mean, but okay. Because she has no idea what the hell's going on. So she goes off onto the side area and up up what is effectively a spiral staircase, but it actually goes around the entire outside edge of the tower, so it's a rather wide and lengthy one. And when she finally gets up above the room, she starts hearing noises. Now, I'm going to describe to you literally, but I described to her, or had her describe in character exactly what she saw. What she sees is the entire middle section of the tower. From, there's the base floor I mentioned, there's the top floor I'll get to in just a second, but everything in between is machinery. Cogs, wheels, gears, pistons, all smashing and churning within each other. Now, all this stuff is alien to them. That's why I had it described in character, because, I can't just say that. The response to that would be, what is a piston, if you know what I mean, and what's a gear and all that fun stuff. This whole place, as you might imagine, is making a hellacious amount of noise. Duh, I suppose would be the answer to that question. And there is just tons upon tons of it. I mean, we're talking so much of it that it spans the entire length of the tower. Now, there is actually a path through here, and the guard says he'll go ahead and show her the way through and to get to a little rest spot. And she's like, oh, yes, please, I would very much like to engage in that. And so they jump and hop and barely make through several athletic rolls here, make it through without being crushed to death, because these things do not stop when there are people there. In fact, it is likely they barely notice there are people there. Finally get to the end, have a nice little meal, and they talk about it, but the general result of the talk is nobody knows what this place is, nobody knows what it's made of, nobody knows why it's here. They got nothing. And that's basically the end of that, because Renthka did not actually roll sufficiently enough to get the other hint I was going to give her there. But moving along. Now, the rest of the group, of course, took the teleport pad to hit up. Now, as they're in the teleporter, everything around them seems to freeze, except for the people on the teleport pad. The way I described it is if the entire world was frozen, again, except for the people on the teleport pad, including, the player's perspective. But they could still move around, but as they tried to move around, it was basically in slow motion, like they were having difficulty moving, if you understand what I mean. Like moving through sludge or molasses or something like that, is I believe how I described it. And as they're moving around, they can see just these lines, these very thin blue lines, which are over everything, right? Pardon me just a moment, I do apologize. Sigh. And one more area. There we go. I don't even know how much of that you heard. So these blue lines, right? As they're looking around, they also hear a tune, which I will not describe to you, because it would be too obvious then, but they do hear this very faint tune being played, almost morosely in the distance, on a piano, what sounds like a piano. And then all of a sudden, bam, just like that, they're up top. And they find themselves, at the receiving pad towards the top. Now, when they're up there, very first thing they notice is there's no wind, even though anybody who knows anything about physics knows that if you're about a mile in the air, there should be some pretty bad wind. Second thing they notice is they're they're just about a mile in the air, and so several of the party members are like, oh god, oh god, oh god. Now, that little line, I don't even think you can see it on the stream, or I'm sorry, I should stop calling this a stream because it's a video. On the video, if you could see this, there's a line connecting the temple proper and the tower. That line is actually a completely clear glass staircase that leads all the way up. Now, there are no railings, no supports to it. However, if you were to try to go over the edge, an energy field will pop up and prevent you from doing so. And as you might imagine, there's no wind. It is actually eerily quiet as you go up there. Now, that bridge is also quite wide. I'd say, I believe I decided it was about 50 feet wide, all things considered. So there are people both coming and going. And as you could probably picture by that, that's quite a climb. So we're talking a rather lengthy journey, climbing up this completely clear glass staircase. Now, I have a bit of a problem with heights, so I had no problem describing this personally, but I'm not sure all my players really got it. I want you to picture that you are over a mile in the air, and this completely clear glass staircase is all that you have standing on, and there is nothing to your right, nothing to your left. And by the way, when I say completely clear, I mean it, like the kind of clear glass that you can actually have in this circumstance, unless it is really, really, really well designed and polished. In other words, if you were to look down, there's a pretty good chance you would not see the glass. You would just see, oh, hey, that's a mile-long drop. That looks awesome. So, yeah. Several of the party members rather appropriately role-played the terror that this had, and I also mentioned that there were several other refugees who were, or not refugees, I'm sorry, pilgrims, who were having really hard time making their way up this staircase, because holy hell, it takes them, I think I decided, about an hour to make the trip up the staircase. 1 hour of that, until finally they get to the top. Now, a couple interesting things about being at the top. First of all, that thrumming I mentioned starts to get much, much stronger the closer they get to the top, and it occurs to several of the more magically inclined individuals in the party that the reason for that is what I already mentioned, that the ley line, the physical interaction of the ley line, is actually up here, where the temple is, and the temple is actually containing it, rather than letting it just kind of splurge spatial elemental energy all over everything. Next thing they notice is that they have infinite mana while they're up here, and Snark, who is a ranger, so he has white magic, literally just starts running around casting Cure left and right. Yay, Cure, 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 just randomly, just having fun with it, because he's got infinite mana. It was actually really amusing, and I did enjoy that interaction. Now, the temple itself is something I have the most difficulty describing, because I can picture it perfectly, but I have no idea how to put that into words. It has no discernible texture. I mentioned that kind of before, but I mean that literally. If you were standing in it, you could not discern the difference between the walls, floor, ceilings, or any seats or anything else within there. It all looks exactly the same. There is no shading, no shadows, no contrast whatsoever to give you an idea of where you're walking, right? So it's a little bit difficult to navigate. But the main area is basically just this massive empty room, that looks like that, and has something else I'll get to in just a second. Anyone who attempts to touch or examine the floor, ceiling, etc., it feels extremely warm in a very comforting sort of way, if you know what I mean. But if you try to move along it, it has what I like to call absolute friction. In other words, if you try to scrape your hand along it, your hand will not move until you remove your hand, if you understand what I mean by that. Now, here's the part that I have the hardest time describing. At any point in time, if you're in the Spatial Temple, no matter where you're standing, it doesn't matter where you're standing, the direction you look at, you are looking at the stars. The actual stars, the actual space. You are looking at space from the perspective of the planet. As if you can picture this, the planet, instead of being the size of a planet, was merely the size of you. And if you were floating exactly where the planet is, and if you were to look around, that is the view you will see. Now, there's one other very important thing here. You'll forgive me for not having an image available. However, I did have one at the time for the players. Not many people are aware of this, but when you look up at the night sky, you are basically not seeing space. You are seeing space filtered through atmosphere, filtered through pollution, filtered through light. A lot of light pollution, especially. There are very few points on the Earth where you can actually look up and see space with very, very little light pollution. And you could see, and it looks completely different, if you understand what I mean. You are truly seeing space. You are seeing brilliance of stars and just everything. You understand what I mean? That's what it looks like here. If you're looking up or around or in any direction within the Spatial Temple, you are seeing space as if there were zero atmospheric problems, zero distortion, zero pollution, zero light pollution. That is literally as if the planet wasn't there and you were there in its place. So the party, naturally, is just like, oh my god, and spends a few times just role-playing how awesome this whole thing looks, which I was rather pleased with, because that took some thought and effort, and I really put some design thought into this place. Excuse me, I guess we can remove this now. So, in the middle of this main room, none of them ever ventured past the main room, and I don't blame them for that. Oh, by the way, there's actually quite a few people, a few thousand people in this main room. Some of them are order people. Some of them are there consulting or talking with people. There's several Ibrexes there whose entire job is to comfort anybody or to consult with them regarding their trial, stuff like that, right? There's also a violet star. It's, if you could literally picture a completely violet burning star just kind of sitting there right in the middle of the area. It's the only thing other than the space in all directions. And there is a line of people which is being, regulated by order individuals, and one person will go in at a time, and after a few seconds the person will come out on the other side. And usually have this kind of shocked expression on their face. Now, I mentioned the time differential specifically because the trial only takes less than a second in real time. How much time it takes from your perspective, well, that varies literally based on the individual. Now let's talk about trials in brief. Like I said, people generally don't talk about the trials, and I will not be telling you about the individual trials, which is a shame because I put a lot of work into them. But all trials are tailored to the individual. Most people consider them to be incredibly personal, deeply impacting things, and tend to not discuss them in character, if you know what I mean. In addition to that, the trial is always going to be about what that element is about. I think I already mentioned this, but this is kind of important because there is also the ability to both pass and fail the trial. Now, whether you pass or fail has impacts that nobody actually fully understands, if indeed it has any impact at all, which is worth noting. It is possible that, passing a trial or failing a trial is, for all intents and purposes, the same thing. It's just whether or not you adhere to that kind of element. There is one exception to this. If you are a green mage, a summoner, and you do not pass your trial, you do not gain the ability to summon an aspect, aka a summon, a summon of that element. There's fairly obvious reasons for that, but there's plenty of lore reasons for that too, which I will not bore you with because, frankly, most people in character aren't even aware of those reasons. So, having thusly viewed the star, everyone who is going to undertake a trial does so. Comes out the other end. Of all of them, only one decided to seek counseling. I found it absolutely fascinating that of all my players, Rory, the human barbarian, decided to seek counseling. Because it is available. It's actually very common, because most of the time undertaking a trial can be a very traumatic experience. Now, Rory asked someone to come by, and if you'll forgive me, I would like to pull up the section about Rory's response to that, unless I did it in private messages, in which case I think I did, didn't I? I'm almost positive I did, actually, now that I think about it. In which case, I cannot share it with you, which really sucks, because that means I failed. Give me just a moment, if you would, please. Hang on a second. I may have done this in actual posts. Here we go. Rory asks, does that mean none of it's true? Can we trust the trial, real or not? Can we trust that the trial, real or not, speaks truthfully? The individual who is working with him, an Abrexy, of course, I've mentioned that before, Abrexy of the first wing, by the way, a summoner, says, what you saw was potential, past, present, or future. It would not deceive you, per se, only show you what might be or what is. There is no real way to know. Now, Rory's response to this was, my insight fails me at the moment. Could you or maybe someone else help me understand? And he says, hang on, I'll go get someone else for you who's slightly better at this kind of thing. Give me just a moment. And he shows up and he basically says, sit wherever it's comfortable to you. And Rory looks around like, And if you're keeping it, he's still in the Spatial Temple, so he's looking around at just space in all directions like, But as he sits, instead of actually falling to the ground, and just hitting his butt like you would imagine, it's basically like he sits on something. He doesn't see anything there. Again, no texture. But literally, in case you're catching this, the temple basically morphs itself such that he can sit there comfortably. And it is actually very comfortable. So he attempts to recline, and he reclines, and he's just fine. And then he says, okay, so I am Orin of Mistweave, in Abrexy of the Order. I was told you need guidance. Would you like to talk here, or in some place more private? And he says, here is fine. And we move on just a second, because Rory took a moment to hit. Now, Rory explains part of his trial. Again, I'm not going to share that. That's up to Rory as to whether he wants it shared or not. My response, or that is to say the Abrexy's response, was the spatial element is about understanding, tolerance, helping others regardless of cost to yourself, and indeed at cost to yourself, forgiveness, and goodwill. If you do not engender these qualities, then it is without question that you would not succeed in your trial, but even a failure is intended to make you think about what, why, and how. My advice is you consider the path you tread and why you tread upon it. And Rora's response is, well, such values are not alien to me. I understand anger is not like wine, and people can be just as quick to regret a misdeed as they would of violence at an outburst. But how do I let someone walk away from something so sick and violent for fun? What about others who may yet fall prey to him? If I really had killed someone, I had probably done so hastily. Scroll down a bit. And his response is, as I told you, such philosophies are not for everyone. But of course it is not static, black, nor white. You do not have to forgive everyone always. That would lead to others taking advantage of you. But you cannot condone everyone either, for such is a dark, short life. Temperance should be considered in your methodology, for if a wound is so recent, perhaps it is literally impossible for you to forgive, even if the soul was sincerely regretful. Or perhaps the horror of what was done to you has tainted you, and that was what the trial was trying to show you, to bring it into your mind so you can face it and deal with it in whatever way suits you best, your own personal way. Now, I mention this because this is very important, and Rory was the only one who really got to see this aspect of things. As I said, the trials are not necessarily pass-fail, except for the summoners, but there's other reasons for that. The trials do actually intend to help you in some way, because for all intents and purposes, what you are dealing with is the sentience of that particular element, the element of space, in this case. And that sentience, in this case, was trying to help every single member that it worked with. Now, there is another niggle. I'm not going to mention that niggle yet. It's specific to this spatial temple. Not all the temples have this particular niggle. I just thought I'd mention that for the future reference. So after this, everyone heads back down and tries to decide on their next move, and most people decide, okay, we need to get going. You know, we've got this mission. You know, I'd like to stay here and stay here and stay here for a long time, but we really do need to get on with our mission. And so they end up leaving the Spatial Temple and heading out for their next destination, which is Al-Corinth. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and stop here because I think that's a good stopping point, and I think Al-Corinth deserves its own section for reasons I'll get into soon. So, I will see you guys soon.